Hey everyone, thanks for joining and welcome to ForeFlight in Canada. This is our new webinar in which one of our Canadian pilot support team members, Dominik, will cover the essentials of using ForeFlight in Canada, both the basics of using the app and getting around the different views and pages in it, and also looking at some of the more advanced features that you can really take advantage of using the app in Canada. So before we begin, I just want to cover a couple of considerations related to the GoToWebinar platform that we're using for this webinar. You can ask any questions you have via the GoToWebinar message panel on the right. You just click that button that looks like a question mark, and that opens up the panel. And you can submit as many questions as you want to us. Feel free to submit them at any time. Don't wait until the very end to submit your question, or you might not get it answered. So anytime you can think of a question, go ahead and submit it, and we'll be responding to them directly through the message panel during the presentation, as well as after the presentation. We'll respond to a few of them out loud. If you're having any audio problems, we recommend you join from a computer and not a mobile device. We've just found that the GoToWebinar platform works a little bit more agreeably when you're accessing it from a computer versus an iPad or an iPhone. So we strongly recommend that you use a computer to view the webinar. This session is also being recorded, and you'll be able to access it after it's over at foreflight.com/onfrequency. So with that, I'll hand it over to Dominik.
Thank you, Sam. Hello, my name is Dominik. I have the pleasure of being a part of ForeFlight's pilot support team here in Canada. And as a Canadian pilot myself, I have the pleasure of being your host today. We've got a lot to get through, so let's dive right in. Today's topics will include a little bit about ForeFlight Mobile, a general run through the application for some pilots that may not have used ForeFlight much in the past, some recently released features and UI enhancements, some ForeFlight's in-flight features and in-flight weather features, as well as weather options, and at the end we'll have time for questions and answers. Who are we? ForeFlight was founded in 2007, and it was one of the first aviation applications for both the iPhone and the iPad. ForeFlight is headquartered in Houston, Texas, and with offices in Austin, Texas, Portland, Maine, Odense, Denmark, and our pilot support team is remote around the world. More than half of our 200 employees are pilots. Many know ForeFlight for its mobile application on the iPad and the iPhone, but ForeFlight has a quite extensive portfolio amongst the aviation industry. Jet Fuel X for business aviation jet fuel pricing, the development of Jeppesen Flight Deck Pro app for commercial airlines, a military flight bag for Department of Defense, as well as the Canadian Air Force, and products like Stratus, Scout, and Sentry for portable ADS-B. A question that comes up very often is what kind of a device will be compatible with ForeFlight, or what kind of a device should we buy? Well, these are our minimum required specifications or recommended specifications, and those include 128 gigabytes of storage, Wi-Fi, and cellular capability. Now, this doesn't mean that you have to have a cellular data plan. It simply means that a Wi-Fi and cellular device will include an internal GPS chip, which is required to have your airplane show up in the air. For more on that, you can visit foreflight.com/buying guide. As the devices come out, we update that website and we can give you more detailed recommendations. Now, as far as the size of device, well, that's really up to the pilot himself or herself. All depending on your cockpit real estate. I personally fly with an iPad mini because it makes sense as in my flight deck. However, if your flight deck allows, a 12.9-inch iPad Pro will look beautiful and give you everything ForeFlight has to offer in a nice, crisp, big display. We get a lot of questions regarding the legality of ForeFlight, or EFBs in general, for general aviation in Canada. Now, the interesting fact is, there's currently no specific laws regulating the use of electronic flight bags or digital charts for procedures for general aviation in Canada. Now, there are several CARS references, and for your purposes, we've displayed them here: 602.08, 602.60, and 602.71. All essentially saying the same thing, that it's up to the pilot in command before commencing a flight to be familiar with all available information, both in regards to weather and electronic charts or paper charts for the intended flight. So basically, it's up to the pilot in command to have everything he or she needs on board. And for that, we have ForeFlight. ForeFlight is what we call an integrated flight application. Now, what does that include? Airport information, maps, plates, documents, logbook, flight planning, weather imagery and in-flight weather, filing and briefing, which you can do directly from ForeFlight in Canada, scratch pads, which essentially replaces the need for paper, and all in one solution that at the end of the day increases situational awareness. That's our main goal. And coincidentally, we take something that used to look like this and turn it into this. We pride ourselves here at ForeFlight for being very user-friendly. So let's take a look at how you get around the application. Here on the main maps page, or airports page, I should say, we have a particular airport, in this case, Lesserby Pearson, and it's divided into several sections. The top section here summarizes the main information, winds, elevation, pattern altitude for the airport, as well as some frequencies. And the bottom section will have further divided tabs, info, weather, runway, where you can find other information. At the very bottom, you'll have your main tab where you can rearrange and take a look at other tabs and pages in the application. You see we have airports, maps, plates, documents, imagery, flights, scratch pads, a little bit of a dash, and then logbook and more across the bottom of the page. The last two items, so logbook here, will be not permanently fixed to the bottom of this tab. However, it is the last used page that I looked at that wasn't permanently in my my bottom menu here. And then you have more. We'll talk a little bit about that in a second. Once you tap more, another side tab appears where you can edit the tab order of what you see at the bottom there. For example, logbook or imagery was the last tab I used in this case, so it is in that dynamic tab range at the bottom. But if I wanted to rearrange this order, I hit Edit Rearrange, Edit Tab Order, and I can drag that imagery tab all the way to the bottom if it's something I don't use very often. So this is a new feature in ForeFlight where we've created a customizable bottom menu there. And now that imagery tab appears way at the bottom where if I need it, I'll get to it. Back to our main airport page now. We can see that in the top right-hand corner, there's a search bar. Now, what we call this is a smart search bar. So you can type in things like the names of places, for example, London or Kitchener, and it would search for names or airports related to that name. You don't necessarily need to know the ident for that airport. In this case, I know the ident for the airport that I want to go to, CYXU, which is London, Ontario. I'll just type that in there, and it'll appear on the airports page. So we've got London here. Again, the top section will have a brief summary of the airport and all its pertinent information, procedures, latest weather, its elevation, pattern altitude, and any clearances, or any frequencies that are available at that airport. In a more detailed sense, the info tab just at the bottom there will have further detail on frequencies and chart supplements, nearby airports, and other details of the airport itself, like operating hours, contact, cycle, and features. The frequency section, you see it's divided into several frequencies: ground, tower. It's pretty self-explanatory there. Chart supplement, this is where you'll find your CFS. And if you tap that CFS button, it shows the CFS page for that particular airport. It does not give you the entire CFS, just the CFS pages pertaining to that airport, which is nice to have a quick little glance at the CFS itself without having to go into your documents. The next tab we're going to take a look at is weather. So the weather tab will show your METAR, TAF, and a couple other weather features there we'll discuss in a second. The METARs are displayed in color-coded format. So in this case, green symbolizing VFR. There's also marginal VFR, which is blue, IFR, which is red, and low IFR, which is pink. So visually, you'll be able to see what London weather is at the moment. It's displayed in the standard METAR coded format, but it's also in the easier to read plain English format at the bottom there. So that METAR is decoded into plain English, and time, wind, visibility is all displayed below. You'll see it a little lower there, nearby weather. That will display any nearby airports that are also displaying weather or nearby weather stations. If you go to TAF, again, that color-coded format, you can see right away that the weather is going to get worse in London as time goes on, going from VFR conditions to low IFR conditions. The MOS. So many Canadians are not familiar with this, but MOS actually stands for Model Output Statistics. And essentially what this does is give you a further forecast up to 60 hours in the future, which updates every 3 hours. So it's a very nice glance to see what the weather is going to be like at the airport, accurate weather information or predictions for that airport into the future, up to 60 hours. Next, we'll take a look at the runway tab. Now, there's a lot going on here because what ForeFlight's doing is taking any NOTAMs that are pertaining to those runways and alerting you right there. So in this case, runway 0927 is closed and only available as a taxiway. And it's making sure that you know that before choosing a particular runway or going out and onto the airport. So this runway tab also shows you the winds. The current METAR, or at least the METAR that came out 48 minutes ago, was showing winds at 090 at 11 knots, and it will give you the crosswind and headwind information for those runways. You see right now, your best choice is runway 09 or runway 15 based on the runway information. Next, we take a look at procedure. Procedure tab will have your airport, departure, approach, and other charts related to the airport, published charts. Now, you see that there are 3 options here for the airport diagram. We have Jepson, ForeFlight, and Nav Canada. So Jepson is if you have a Jepson subscription linked into ForeFlight, or if you've purchased a Jepson subscription when you purchased your ForeFlight subscription, which is always an option. ForeFlight, you will always have, no matter what your subscription option. Those are ForeFlight in-house built-in diagrams that we've built for airports just as a supplement and as an integration into our aeronautical layer. Nav Canada, if you have a Canadian ForeFlight subscription, you'll have a Nav Canada aerodrome chart as you would with paper charts. Scrolling down all the way to other, this is where you'll find any VFR terminal procedure charts related to the airport. Now you see we've switched here to CYSN, Niagara District. That's because London didn't have any VFR terminal procedure charts. But taking a look at it here, if we go to other and tap on that, you'll get the CFS page that has the information pertaining to that VFR terminal procedure. You'll notice that besides these charts, there's a little Send To map icon. Now this is a Pro Plus and a Performance Plus feature, so if you have Basic Plus, you won't see this. But this gives you the ability to send this aerodrome chart directly to your maps page as an overlay. This is geo-referenced, And as you begin to move, you will see your aircraft move along this aerodrome chart. Finally, on the airports page, we have the NOTAM tab. And again, it divides NOTAMs into airport, obstacles, flight information region, and JEPSOM specific NOTAMs. ForeFlight tries its best also to help you read plain English NOTAMs as well as adding any diagrams, such as that little instrument tab there regarding to the instrument, RNAV GNSS runway 27, just to kind of help you read the NOTAMs. As we all know, there can be plenty to read, and to decipher those a little easier. We now take a look at the top right-hand corner of the screen, where you'll see the FBO tab. The FBO tab displays all the fixed-based operators at the field. So in this case, Executive Aviation and Flightline Services London, as well as their fuel prices. Now you can tap on any number of those to get further detail, like contact information and hours of operation. But for time purposes today, we'll just leave it at that. Next, beside the FBO tab there, you'll see the 3D view tab. The 3D button shows a 3D view of the airport itself, which is a relatively new feature in ForeFlight. And we'll get into that a little more in detail later on. But just as a glance here, you'll see the altitude and MSL, the airport elevation itself, all the runways available. And if you tap on those runways, it'll give you a 3-degree slope as if you were approaching one of those runways. It also takes the current wind information and will display it if it has it in the bottom left-hand corner. You'll see a little wind vector there. Right now it's just showing the north arrow, but we'll take a look at that a little later on. All right, moving on to the maps page. This is where ForeFlight really shines, and really it's bread and butter. We'll plan a flight from London, Ontario to Oshawa, and we'll take a look at how you do that on the maps page. So first, you can just tap on any airport on the map and add that to your route. Or, in this case, if I know my route, I'm just going to type it in. And select my aircraft. The top left there, you can select the performance profile you'd like. Now, ForeFlight has many performance profiles, and the altitude. We can talk about performance profiles a little later on. The altitude selector is a great little tool because it'll show you your expected tailwind or headwind, as well as your fuel burn for that altitude. On the top right-hand corner, if you hit Procedure, you'll bring up the ForeFlight Procedure Advisor, and that will give you the departures and approaches from those airports. So I'm just quickly choosing a departure, which is London 2, and an approach into Oshawa. Let's make this an IFR flight, so I'm going to hit the routes, and what comes up is a route advisor. Now you see that you have a recommended route and an ATC filed route. You can choose any of those, and it will advise you on what altitude to fly based on the clearances. Now I can again hit my altitude advisor there and choose what altitude I want to fly at, but 9,000 looks pretty good, or 9,500 if I want to do it VFR. If I hit Procedure Advisor again, I can load in a particular approach that I'm expecting in Oshawa. If I take a look at the winds, I expect runway 12, so I can do that. And I'm going to choose my estimated time of departure so that all my ETs, fuels, and winds and flight planning or en route planning is correct based on the time that I'm departing. Now I know this is a little quick there, but I did tap the 3D view, which gives me a 3D view of the route I'm about to fly. Now I wouldn't sweat too much about that. We're going to take a look at 3D preview a little later on, but it's really neat that I can take a look at the route that I'm intending to fly around Toronto and Toronto's airspace right into the approach itself. It's just a neat little feature to visualize your route especially if it's an airport that you haven't really been to before. The navlog tab itself will give you a standard navlog. The remaining and ATA values there will populate once you start moving. And the profile view will give you a profile view of your flight, including airspace, which if you tap on it, you can highlight, as well as some other features, which we'll take a look at a little later. You can send your flight or your intended flight to the flights page using that send to button. And this is a really easy way to transition into that flight filing stage. But before we get there, let's go back to the maps page. So the maps page itself is blank until you turn on the aeronautical layer or you put down a underlying chart. What I want to show you here specifically, though, is that you can customize what you see on your maps page using that aeronautical view. And what this allows us to do is, unlike a paper chart, be very dynamic with what you see or what you don't see on the maps page itself. You can declutter or clutter anything to your specific flight plan or mission that day. Now, what I'm going through here is the settings tab, which is a little gear icon on the maps page there, top. And I'm going through what I want to see and what I don't want to see on my aeronautical maps. Right now, I turned on the low-level airways, and what that does is bring up a lot of waypoints, GPS waypoints, and high-level tracks that if you're flying VFR, you might not want to see, which you can turn off completely. Organized tracks for those crossing the Atlantic are also displayed and updated daily. You can also click on one of those organized tracks to get more information on it. What's great is that it's a high fidelity global feature. For now, I'll turn off those organized tracks. Scroll down here, and there's a lot of quick filters and auto center modes, depending on how you want to fly your aircraft, track up or track forward. Map overlay features that you can turn off and turn on. For example, extended center lines, distance rings, glide advisors. This is a really quick menu to turn off and on those features. If I drop down my selectability there on the drop down menu, I can turn on map layers like Street View and aerial maps. Now these maps can't be downloaded for in-flight, but you can reference them on the ground before flying. The VNC, however, can be accessed in-flight, and as we see here, we can overlay multiple things on top of that underlying map. So on your left-hand column, you'll have the base, and on the right-hand column, you'll have anything you can overlay on top of your base map. And as you start overlaying features, you can see it gets pretty cluttered. Right now we have radar, traffic, and I just turned off SIGMETs and CWAs. Tapping on any one of the airports itself displays the airport information. I know I ran through that pretty fast, but the point of this is to get you very familiar with the maps page. And the only way you're going to do that is to play around with it yourself and tap all the options you have available to you. You can customize the maps page to your specific flying needs, and depending if you do IFR, VFR, or both, you may want to see some things as opposed to others. And that's really what ForeFlight's trying to do here. Downloads. Downloads is a big thing in ForeFlight because we want to make sure you have all the pertinent information you need to go flying before you even take off. Downloads can be accessed through the bottom right corner. There's a More tab. And at the very top, you have Downloads. Tap Downloads, and you get a separate pop-up window that displays all the download options. At the top here, you'll see downloads are segregated by country and area, geographic region. And at the bottom here, we have the types of downloads that are currently downloaded onto the application or device. Going back to download settings up here, if you tap on Canada, you see all the charts that have been selected to download. So here's when we could be very selective on what we want to download to our device and what we don't. If I'm a VFR only flyer in Canada and I do not want IFR charts, we can deselect and select those up here. This again will save storage on your device. If I'm an IFR only flyer, then maybe visual navigation charts is not something I want on my device. Along the same lines, down here, we have the Canada region selected, but it's divided into every province. So if I'm a pilot in British Columbia and I don't plan on going to Ontario or Quebec anytime soon, I can deselect those areas to download. And that would save me, in this case, almost 3 gigabytes of data on my device. Once you've made all those selections and you know what charts and what areas you want downloaded, you go back to the main page here and tap download, which is the the blue button at the bottom there. That'll make sure you have everything downloaded. Now, what happens when I do make that trip from British Columbia to Ontario that one time? Well, ForeFlight has this really neat feature called Pack. And Pack is available on the Maps page. Under the Flight Plan tab and the Edit tab of that Flight Plan tab, we have that little suitcase icon. And the suitcase icon has a little further icon, the red little exclamation mark there, indicating that we have something that needs to be downloaded for our route, like a chart that we don't have downloaded, or information for our route that we don't have downloaded. What ForeFlight does is take a 100-mile radius around your departure and destination aerodrome and 50 miles along either side of your route and says, okay, what do we need for this route of flight that we don't have downloaded? In this case, it also takes a look at weather and fuel prices and NOTAMs. So it's a really quick and easy way to plan a flight. Tap that little suitcase and it says you need to pack for this trip. Total of 253 megabytes. If we tap Pack, it'll start downloading everything we need for that route of flight. Really quick and easy way to make sure you have everything you need. All right, documents. Documents in ForeFlight can be accessed through the bottom menu on the Documents tab. Now, once you access that, you'll notice that the documents is divided into binders, My Drives, and Drives. The Drive section is essentially a catalog of, in this case, NAV Canada issued publications that you can download directly onto your device. We have both French and Canadian versions of many of these publications. And this is where you can download your full CFS or Canadian Flight Supplement if you are required to do that. You can further divide your downloads into your separate binders, which is essentially your separate folders based on your route of flight or your particular aircraft. This is where I put in a lot of my POHs for airplanes, flight test guides, things like that I've imported into ForeFlight, and then organize them into my binders. A really quick and easy way to manage your documents in ForeFlight is by integrating a third-party document organizer like Amazon S3, Box, or Dropbox being my favorite. And you can do that by signing into your account at plan.foreflight.com and going to integrations. In integrations, you can connect your Dropbox account. And so by doing that, Whatever folder you create in Dropbox will then be synced into ForeFlight Mobile. That's how you can keep your documents up to date and sync them really easy across devices. These will then show up as My Drives in the actual document tab in ForeFlight. And if we go back to that, you'll see that there's My Drives down at the bottom there, and then Drives, which is managed by ForeFlight. But My Drives would be managed by whatever Dropbox account or any other application you choose to connect to ForeFlight. Worth mentioning that in the ForeFlight drive in Documents, this is where you can find ForeFlight specific publications, such as Pilot's Guide to ForeFlight Mobile. This is one of the most important documents that my team uses to help other pilots. It includes a very thorough description of all the features in ForeFlight. And if you have any questions or concerns, you can always reference that document first before contacting one of our pilot support team members. Although we'll be more than happy to answer your questions. In fact, if you prefer to send an email, by all means, we're ready and standing by. All right, now we get into filing and briefing in ForeFlight. Now, many of you don't know, but you can actually file ICAO, VFR, IFR, and Y and Z flight plans directly through ForeFlight, getting sent directly to Nav Canada. Here's how to do that. Once you've created a flight on the maps page, you can send it to the flights page, or you can create a flight directly in the flights page. So we're on the flights page right now. On your left-hand side, you'll have a column with your recently filed or planned flights. You can search that and filter those out by destination or departure or aircraft. You can also add a new flight directly into the flights page here. But for today's purposes, we'll just view this one, which is a flight from Edmonton to Grand Prairie. It's an IFR flight. And we're going to take a look on how to file this. So on the right-hand side there, you'll have a brief summary of the flight itself, its distance, ETA, fuel burned, and expected average headwind. Below that, you'll have a navlog option, briefing, file attachments, and messages. We'll get to those a little later on. Departure destination, your alternate, if you so choose to put one in there. In this case, we would. Below that, we have the aircraft. So what aircraft we're going to be flying, as well as what performance profile we're expected or we want to select for this flight. The flight rules we're going to file today. In this case, we're going to choose IFR. The routing. Now, this routing will bring up the route advisor that we had on the maps page. Here, again, you can view the recommended route for this leg, or the previously cleared ATC routes that were given to aircraft doing this flight. So we see the ATC cleared route. They cleared a turboprop, a jet and piston, anywhere from 8,000 to flight level 340 yesterday, and which was just a direct route of flight. But there was also routes filed and cleared through Yankee Zulu Uniform, MESBO, and MESBO 4 arrival, which we're going to do in this case and choose. Below that, you have a payload section. Here you can put the number of people you're expecting, as well as your cargo, your fuel loads. In this section, you can specifically choose your fuel policy. Now, I will mention off the bat here that this is a performance-only feature, the ability to choose your fuel policies. And beneath that, you'll get a weight summary of all your zero fuel weights, your ramp weights, takeoff weights, and landing weights as well. Now, it is important to mention that this weight section here is not connected to the weight and balance tab or page in ForeFlight. They are, as of this moment, two separate things. So if you've created a weight and balance profile and you've done your weight and balance before the flight on the weight and balance page, it doesn't reflect into the flight's page weight tab here. That'll have to be done separately. This weight section in flights is specifically referencing the payload and fuel that you put in here priorly. So that weight section, you'll have your destination services section there, and there you can actually choose the fixed base operator, or the FBO, that you're planning to use or arrive to in Grand Prairie. So if we select that, we're given a list of all FBOs on the field, and we can select which airport, or which FBO that we're planning to go to. It also gives you the current fuel prices there. And if we tap on that even further, we can go into further detail about that FBO. Its frequencies, its phone numbers, emails, any amenities or services that they offer. You can call that FBO directly if you're using an iPhone. You can also comment on that FBO as well and look at any of its fees. Below that, we have a flight log. Now, the flight log is strictly for just notation purposes. If you want to note your fuel at shutdown, or if you don't want to note down your times, you can do that there and it'll be stored under your flight. Below that, we have the pack feature, which we discussed previously. We'll pack all the pertinent information that you need and charts that you need for your flight. And all the way at the bottom, we have the Proceed to File button. If we select that, we pull up essentially what is a ICAO flight plan form. You have the form type, you have the flight rules that we're going to be filing in. In this case, we'd have to change that to IFR. The flight type, all the aircraft information, your departure, destination, airport information, and eventually you get down to the section which is very important for Canadian pilots, the pilot information and the Nav Canada specific information. All this needs to be filled out as it is a requirement by Nav Canada. At the bottom there, you'll see Nav Canada section, the undercarriage, arrival report, and ELT type. That's something specific to filing in Canada, which is why that always has to be filled out. Once that's all completed, you tap File, and it'll ask you, hey, are you ready to file this flight plan? It's expected to depart in 29 minutes according to your estimated time of departure. If we select File, that'll get sent off. We always recommend to be using some kind of a Wi-Fi or cellular network, as it doesn't need an internet connection. And that'll get sent off to your local FSS. At the bottom there, you'll see a cancel and amend option. So if you want to cancel that flight plan before the estimated time of departure, you can through ForeFlight. And if you want to amend something on that flight plan, you can do so as well. If we were to select that navlog option at the top, you get a navlog for your particular flight. This navlog is a further detailed navlog than what you'll see on the maps page. And it'll break down your waypoints, your winds aloft, as well as provide you with a summary and time section at the bottom. If we select the briefing tab, this will give you a weather briefing for your particular flight. These briefings are displayed in great PDF formats. So at the top there, we see wind, temperature, and turbulence for flight level 80, which is 8,000 feet. Any significant weather charts will be available there as well. If we scroll down, we get the METARs and TAFs for the airports, departure, destination, and en route airports, and any SIGMETs or AirMETs for that FIR, or Flight Information Region. It'll also give you a breakdown of the written NOTAMs. And if we decide to cancel our flight, which we did in this case, once we tap that cancel button, we will receive a notification that our flight plan has been canceled, and we'll also receive an email. I should mention that when we did file the flight plan initially, we also receive an email that is linked to our account that flight plan has been filed. So we do have that on record. So far we've covered the basics from your maps page, your airports page, and into the flights page, all the way down to filing a flight plan. But there's a lot more. Beginning with none other than synthetic vision. Now, synthetic vision allows you to fly with a lot more confidence in all conditions, especially terrain, and it provides you with a visually stunning, high-performance hazard awareness capability available both on the iPad and the iPhone. ForeFlight's synthetic vision uses Jeppesen global high-resolution terrain and obstacle data, data that's also used for certified panel-mounted avionics. What it allows you to do is split your screen as well, so you can even have a chart or a plate in the portrait or landscape view. Right now we're in portrait. And gives you really that situational awareness that you need when flying into these airports. If you have pitch and roll information or an AHRS capable device like a Sentry that's connected to ForeFlight, you will get pitch and roll information as well. In this case here, we see that there's no attitude information, but we are getting GPS ground speed and GPS altitude, as well as GPS position along that map. This is a Pro Plus feature or a Performance Plus feature, and really a great tool for all the pilots out west or in Western Canada when flying through mountainous terrain. The example we see here is flying into Kelowna in British Columbia, and really getting that situational awareness all in one view. We now move into the weight and balance feature in ForeFlight. Now, the weight and balance feature in ForeFlight, again, as we mentioned, is separate from what you see on the Flights tab there. There is a weight and balance page that you can navigate to. And on that weight and balance page, you get what you're probably most used to looking at is a graphical chart of where your weight and balance lies for that particular flight, the ability to edit your loads and your passengers, and set up your aircraft according to what your POH specifications are telling you. If you ever have trouble setting up your weight and balance profile, feel free to shoot an email to team@foreflight.com, which I'll get into at the end here, but we'll be more than happy to forward you a sample weight and balance for your type of aircraft that you can fill in with your specifications, or help you just figure out the specifications to your graph there so that you have the proper data. Once it's all set up, and I argue that the setup is the hardest part, after that, loading up your aircraft or doing weight and balances will be a breeze. Checklist. Checklist is a feature built into ForeFlight, essentially there to replace or supplement your paper checklists. Again, all part of that integral flight app experience is integrating everything into one, so you're not shuffling with paper checklists. These checklists can be spoken to. They can be set to speak, which in this case they speak to you, so that leaving your hands free. They can be customized to normal, abnormal, and emergency situations. As you go through each item, you can check it off or skip that item and go back to it later. And again, you can create your own checklists for your particular airplane or create templates for other things like a safe checklist. Logbook. Logbook is one of my favorite features in ForeFlight because it alleviates me from having a separate electronic flight logbook or maintaining my paper logbook. But this is where you would input all your hours and view reports, manage aircraft, manage people, manage your qualifications, and look at all your summaries based on your flying. You can also generate a PDF version of your logbook once it's all ready to go to give that to an employer or anyone who requires it. Now, many of you may be asking, well, how do I get my paper logbook into ForeFlight, into an electronic format? And there's a couple ways to do this. Many users of other electronic logbook platforms have the ability to export their logbook already in a CSV file, which would be great because once you can do that, you can then download our ForeFlight template by logging into your account online and using that template to fill in your hours and uploading that template directly into Logbook. So there is a process how to do it. If you do have any questions, feel free to email us and we'll help you out with that. But essentially, once you get your logbook in that ForeFlight template profile, you can go on Logbook on your profile online, upload it, and it'll be synced to your mobile device. Along the same lines, you can export all of your logbook data into a CSV file as well, and export that into another program or print it off on your computer as required. We now delve into some weather tools available in ForeFlight. Weather data such as animated radar is one of the main features on the maps page. The weather layer, the radar layer can be selected on the drop-down menu on the left-hand side of the screen. And animated using the animation bar at the bottom. You can see where the radar image is updated every 5 minutes. If you zoom in on a particular area, those black numbers that show up, those are actually cloud tops. And the dashed lines are the vectors of that particular cell and where it's going to be in 20, 40, and 60 minutes. So I'll just play that again in case you've missed it. The radar layer also includes lightning information. Zooming in here, and you can see those black track lines with 4 dots. Those dots represent 20-minute intervals, so it's 20, 40, and 60 minutes. Which is a really great kind of forecast to have where that cell is tracking, especially if you're really close to a cell. Some other weather data. Visible infrared satellite is available in ForeFlight, again from the drop-down menu. So previously would be visible, and this is visible, and this is infrared. Getting a good idea of where that weather is coming from. That is a global feature. We have also icing forecasts and altitude sliders available. If you select the icing layer on ForeFlight, which for Canadian pilots I would select the icing global layer, as the icing US is specifically for the United States. So by selecting the global icing layer there, it will give you forecast icing conditions at all altitudes. And those altitudes can be adjusted using that slider on the right side. So right there is 8,000 feet. And if I animate that, that'll show what forecast icing is supposed to look like at 8,000 feet. Along the same lines, you can do so with turbulence. So turbulence is a global forecasting tool here. By selecting turbulence global, I can select a particular altitude on the bottom right-hand side. press play on my animation bar at the bottom, and that will animate the forecast turbulence on my maps page. Other weather data, such as METARs. I really like this feature in ForeFlight where you can access the flight category. And what the flight category does is display METARs by category along the entire map. So you can see that all these stations are reporting VFR conditions, and if I want to look into further detail, I just tap on one of those airports and it brings up a little pop-up menu where I can take a look at what further conditions exist at that airport. But it's a really easy way to see what's reporting VFR, IFR, or marginal VFR. Further along, winds aloft. Winds aloft is a great feature because you can take a look at what the jet streams are doing or other winds at other altitudes. As I go up here in flight levels, you can see that that jet stream today is at about 33,000 feet just by the speeds and directions of those winds. I can zoom in on any one of those wind bars, and if I tap on one of those bars, it will actually give me the speed and direction and temperature of those winds. So let's go down here to about 15,000 feet. If I tap on one of those, that'll be a 15,000 feet, 263, and it'll give you the speed and temperature at that particular point. This is a global layer, so available around the world. And I find it really handy, especially if I'm planning a longer route, to see what the winds are going to be doing aloft. Now, this is something we kind of overlooked when we looked at the profile view earlier on, but in recent releases of ForeFlight, you can now see icing and turbulence forecasts in the profile view. Let's take a look at that. So now we've built a flight plan, we hit the profile tab, and now, along with airspace, we also have icing and turbulence options. We can pinch and zoom in on our route, and really take a look at where we're going to experience that icing or that turbulence. We can filter those out by only selecting one or the other. So along this route, I'm really not expecting to see a lot of icing, but I am expecting to see quite a bit of turbulence at 8,500 feet. I should mention that this is a performance-only feature. Sorry about that, let's just back up here. This icing and turbulence preview is also available in the 3D preview in ForeFlight. This is a Performance Plus feature as well, but we see this in action and it's quite neat. So let's take a 3D preview of our flight. We select play and we can adjust the speed of which we're viewing this preview using the bottom menu tab there. We can also select and speed up this particular route of flight. Using our route section there, we can tap on a specific waypoint. Now we see there in the background is actually icing forecasts. And using that layer selector there, we've currently selected icing forecasts, and we can see that there's some forecast icing at 8,500 feet to our left. We have an altitude slider on the bottom right-hand side where we can adjust the icing forecasts. So essentially, we can see if we're planning on flying through that icing at any point in our flight, which is, to me, a really neat feature. We can do the same with turbulence. So here at 9,000 feet, again, like our profile view is saying, we aren't expecting much icing, but we are expecting a lot of turbulence. And where along that route of flight is really easy to visualize using this 3D preview. Your aircraft will always be visible, and you can see that in descending into Grand Prairie there, we're going to experience quite a bit of turbulence. This brings us to weather imagery. Many Canadians are familiar with looking at weather imagery for their pre-flight planning purposes. And these images are available in ForeFlight as well, under the Imagery tab. If we go to Imagery, select region of Canada, we can see right off the bat there, we're given the surface analysis and significant weather charts. Furthermore, we're given all the GFAs pilots are used to, icing and turbulence charts, and also some composite radar echo tops charts as well as radar precipitation. For that, I'd probably recommend using the radar layer on the maps page for more up-to-date information. Now, a lot of pilots ask us, what are some in-flight weather options for Canadian pilots? As we don't have widely available ADS-B sources here in Canada, we always recommend the Garmin GDL 51 and 52 combination with ForeFlight. And the reason is, the GDL 5152 will give you a Sirius XM receiver that will display in-flight weather information in Canada with a subscription. The Sirius XM weather subscription really has a lot of benefits to it versus ADS-B. There's no line of sight restrictions. You've got coast-to-coast coverage, high-resolution radar and base reflectivity radar. NextRad storm cells, we've got echo tops, surface visibility, really essentially everything you need included in that package. Now, once you get the GDL 51 or 52, and the difference being the 52 actually has an ADS-B receiver as well, while the 51 has just a Sirius XM receiver. But regardless of which one you get, you will need to subscribe to a Sirius XM subscription, and Sirius XM offers one specifically for pilots of ForeFlight. It's $39.99 a month, and it's the only subscription really compatible with ForeFlight Mobile. Includes Canadian weather radar, cloud-to-cloud lightning, TAFs, METARs, observations, echo tops, an all-in-one package. If you're interested in this, you can visit foreflight.com/connect, and you'll get all the information you require to sign up for Sirius XM. Moving on from weather, we're now going to explore some of ForeFlight's in-flight features. Like its moving map display. So once you're in the air, ForeFlight provides a moving map display on the maps page. And as long as you have GPS reception, you're going to see your aircraft displayed on the maps page itself. Now in this case, I am doing a approach into Terrace, British Columbia. I have a chart overlaid. And for great situation awareness, I would like to see my aircraft on the map itself. So we're finding the approach, and I know exactly where I am on that approach, which is great. As previously shown, you can also just have it displaying your route of flight without any charts or plates. If you notice, the aeronautical chart displayed in this situation also gives you the Victor Airways without displaying the chart itself, but just giving you the aeronautical data for your particular route of flight. I find that to be very handy. The instrument panel that can be displayed at the bottom of your map screen gives you a lot of quick information to reference during your flight. What I've selected here is the thermal state of my iPad, which is a relatively new feature, and I find it very helpful. If your iPad is prone to overheating, or you're placing it on the windshield and the sun's beating down on it, this thermal state notification there will tell you if your iPad is overheating or if it's in a nominal state. Essentially, you always want it in that nominal state. If it is overheating, you've got to cool it down, remove it from your glare shield, or turn it off. What's essentially there for is to give you that alert that your iPad is overheating, and by default, iPads are designed to turn off, which you don't want to do during your flight. Vertical speed information, ETA, destination, your current track, your GPS altitude, your ground speed based on your GPS as well. Those can all be displayed there. What's really neat about this tab here is that it can be customized to your preference. So if you tap on any one of those icons or those instruments at the bottom, you'll get a menu and you can change any one of those to your personal preference. In this case, we can change cabin pressure to pressure altitude, and it would do that. I should mention that most modern iPads and iPhones have a barometer in it, so you're able to display cabin altitude and pressure altitude. Map overlays. Map overlays are again available through the quick drop-down setting on the Maps page. And here you're able to select things like distance rings. If I select distance rings on, you can see that when I zoom in on my aircraft, there's a dynamic distance ring that's displayed around my airplane. As I zoom in, it gets a little smaller in range, and as I zoom out, it gets bigger. I find that really handy because you can quickly reference how far you are away from an airport, or maybe even a cell if you have in-flight weather. If I go to the settings here, I can actually change that from nautical miles to minutes. So now my distance rings are going to be displayed in minutes instead of nautical miles. So now I can say, oh, well, I'm about 5 minutes away from the nearest airport. And if needed, you can relay that to anyone like ATC or your passengers. Another great little feature is breadcrumbs. Breadcrumbs essentially create a line at the back of your aircraft showing where you flew and your route of flight previous to your current position. Once breadcrumbs is turned on, you'll see something like that trailing your airplane. And if you're doing any survey work or sightseeing, you can see your previous track directly on the maps page. This is also great for a training environment if you're shooting approaches, or if you're directing a student to track inbound or outbound from a VOR. You can always take a look at ForeFlight and show them how they did. Extended center lines. Once you turn extended center lines on in ForeFlight, it does exactly that. It will give you an extended center line from your departure or destination aerodrome. Now, for this to work, it is important that you do have a departure or destination airport in there. If you do not have one in there, you won't see any extended center lines. So we'll just make sure that the route has a departure and destination. And then when you are approaching that airport, it's really easy to visualize where you're intercepting a long final, or perhaps if you're doing circuits, making sure to square off those circuits. This brings us to global hazard awareness. It's ForeFlight's goal to make you very situationally aware and aware of hazards, specifically on your route of flight in mountainous terrain, for example, or with terrain with a lot of obstacles if you're doing a lot of low-level flying. So how does ForeFlight do this? Well, one of the ways we already discussed with the attitude indicator and AHRS, using synthetic vision, and if you have an AHRS input from a Sentry, for example, we can display your pitch and roll information directly on the synthetic vision screen. And if you find yourself in IMC conditions where you're not supposed to be in IMC conditions, you can really reference this as a backup instrument to see if you are, in fact, in the right attitude. Furthermore, Hazard Advisor. Hazard Advisor is a feature available in ForeFlight When turned on, you'll see that Hazard Advisor displays any hazards along your route of flight based on your current altitude. And it'll display that in a color-coded format, for example, in red and yellow. It does so not only for terrain, but also for obstacles like power lines and wind farms. If you tap on any one of those obstacles, it'll give you a little more information. For example, that one there is at around 4,500 MSL. It's not lit, and it's 150 feet AGL. Hazard alerts work along the same way. This is, again, going back to the approach into Terrace, British Columbia.
Warning, terrain ahead.
Well, ForeFlight's just warned me that there's terrain ahead based on my current GPS altitude and position and projected route of flight, which was great. I dismissed that alert because I'm aware of it. You can see as we're descending, the dynamic page on the right-hand screen is adjusting those hazards based on our altitude. Things should be getting more red. I think that's it. And you can see there, it's a really, really great way to kind of be aware of everything around you and so that there's no surprises. Other in-flight alerts can be accessed through the settings page. Now you can see there's a whole plethora of them to take a look at, but I really advise you to take a look at your settings and your alerts to see what kind of things you have turned off and on there. ForeFlight allows for things like destination weather frequency alerts. If you're approaching an airport and ForeFlight detects that based on your GPS position, it will give you your destination weather frequency far enough back for you to tune it in and report it in. A nice little fail-safe feature that ForeFlight has on the ground is if you're approaching a runway, that runway awareness alert will be displayed, and it'll say, hey, you're approaching runway 33. It will also alert you when you've entered that runway and how many feet of runway are available for takeoff from that particular point. All right, recently released features in ForeFlight. So the current version of ForeFlight as of today is version 12.9.1. If you're ever in doubt on what version you're running on your device, you can take a look at what version you're on by going to More and About. And at the very top of the page in ForeFlight, it'll say what version you're currently running. If it is out of date, you just go to your App Store, Apple App Store, and you download the latest version of ForeFlight. Here are just a list of some of the most recently released features. We've introduced internet traffic via FlightAware into ForeFlight using an internet connection on the ground. A slide out more menu and an edit tab order. We've introduced parity to the iPhone, making it as similar to the iPad as possible. Multitasking support on iPads due to the new iOS features. Aircraft type restrictions in Procedure Advisor. Multimode timer in More. We've got hotspots on airport diagrams. PDF form support in Documents. YZ filing in Canada. Icing and turbulence in Profile and 3D view, which we took a look at. Scratch pads now sync across all your devices. And there's some additional templates as well. If you ever want to take a look at what's been recently released, you can just visit our website, foreflight.com/releases, and it'll give you a nice list of each release and what is included in those releases. Internet traffic. Let's take a look at that. Internet traffic is a really, really neat feature. And what it essentially does is import a live global stream of flight-aware traffic directly in ForeFlight. It's the same traffic map layer used for ADS-B devices, the traffic layer that if you had an ADS-B device, you would select. And what it does, it switches automatically to ADS-B traffic if you are airborne with an ADS-B device. Now, this is usually not a problem for Canadian pilots, but if you're flying in the States with an ADS-B device, know that if you have the traffic layer selected, it will switch automatically. It displays airborne and ground targets. You can see altitude and tail numbers, and many other details if you just tap on those targets. It uses distinct position reports from FlightAware to interpolate movement, and it displays that smoothly on the map. So this is important to note because it doesn't display the exact position of the airplane. It displays an interpolation of where that airplane is headed. So it will be delayed, which is why this feature is disconnected once you get airborne without an ADS-B device. We don't want you flying with FlightAware traffic displayed on the map. But it is a very neat feature to have on the ground, and take a look at the inbounds and outbounds from an airport. You can search by flight numbers, so it's an internet traffic search, and it is available on all subscription plans and on ForeFlight Web. Here's an example of it. Zooming in on Toronto Pearson, we can select a target and it'll give us more detail on that target itself. If we zoom in on the airport, we can see the ground targets. Some are aircraft that are taxiing on the ground, and you can even see some maintenance vehicles that are outputting information. You can, using the search bar, search for specific flights. So if your loved one or someone else is on a flight, you want to take a look at it, you have ForeFlight open, you can just take a look. A multi-mode timer. So yes, ForeFlight finally has a timer. This has been a feature a long time coming, and we're really glad to have released it. The timer can be found under the More tab, bottom right. And if you tap on it, it starts counting up. Tap to zero it out, and if using that arrow, you can actually select for it to count down. So it's a pretty straightforward timer, but it's really easy to have. And you can always hide and unveil it with the More tab there. Procedure Advisor. So the Procedure Advisor has been enhanced. It now displays which departures and arrivals serve which type of airplanes. So you can see that leaving Pearson, for example, we have jet arrivals only, and we have turboprop and piston arrivals. So if I was a piston aircraft and I was coming into an airport, I would only be able to, or I would only want to select the piston arrivals. Glide Advisor. The Glide Advisor is a really neat feature which uses your aircraft's glide ratio, current GPS altitude, AGL, surrounding terrain height, and winds aloft, which has either been packed before your flight or updated in flight via ADS-B or XM, to present a continuously updated ring showing your glide range based on your aircraft performance. In this image here, we see that your glide is going to be restricted to the right based on the terrain, the rising terrain. It's also important to note that the Glide Advisor ring shows up when your GPS altitude is more than 200 AGL. And your glide settings can be updated or modified based on your specific aircraft glide performance. Now, that can be changed in the settings. If you tap on Settings, Glide Advisor, it'll give you your best glide speed and your glide ratio to input. Now you can take that from your POH, or if you have trouble setting it up, give us a shout. You can always take a look at the Pilot's Guide to ForeFlight Mobile as well, where it lists step-by-step instructions on how to get your glide ratio. Custom content. The Custom Content tab is where you can manage custom content that you've created or imported into the application. This includes custom charts, custom map layers like KML files, KMZ files. User waypoints also can be imported with KML or CSV files, and content packs in general. So this is a really great way to display things like practice areas or just general custom maps that can be geo-referenced onto the maps page. And essentially it's managed in this custom contents tab, importing and exporting. You can import it via email, iTunes, AirDrop, or a direct link. Track logs is a very new feature that I use quite often in ForeFlight. And essentially what track logging records is details about your flight, including the track and altitude using GPS, and external devices like a Sentry or your internal iPad GPS, which is the most common. Track logs are then synchronized across your devices using sync, and you can share those track logs with other people, other pilots, via email. You can also download them and display them in other external apps like Google Earth. And it's a very efficient way of recording your flight. The log files usually require less than 300 kilobytes per hour, something like that. Don't quote me on that. And track logs can be enabled for either manual or automatic recording. Tapping More and Settings, then scrolling to Track Log. There you can enable the recording options. And once you do record a flight, you can access those track logs in the Track Logs tab and display them both in a profile view and in a map view. Scratch pads. So Scratch pads has been updated recently. You can now sync, or I should say Scratch pads now sync across all your devices automatically, where previously they did not. And some new templates are available. So by adding a new Scratch pad, here's where we can substitute paper for just your stylus pen or your finger and write down any pertinent information you need on your flight. We've also added some new options like takeoff data templates, holding clearance templates, and landing clearance templates as well, which I don't think is displayed here at the moment. All right, moving into something that we skipped over previously, but I did promise I'd go back to it, the airport 3D view. So 3D is something new into ForeFlight in the recent years, and it's available on the Performance subscription. We'll start off with Airport 3D Preview. So it was initially introduced as just the Airport 3D Preview. Recently, we added 3D Review and Camera Mode, and most recently, we added the 3D Approach View as well. We'll start with the 3D Airport View. So if I go into an airport on the airports page and I look up an airport like Brantford, you can see that a 3D view is an option on the top right hand side. If I select that, I open a 3D view of the airport, and tapping on any one of the runways gives me a 3-degree slope to that as if I was approaching that runway. Really easy and neat way to orientate yourself with unfamiliar airports. I should note that this 3D view works at any point on the map. So if you tap and hold at any point in the map, for example, here we're in British Columbia. If you tap and hold and select a particular point, it'll give you a lat long of that particular point. You can then select more and 3D, and that'll give you the 3D option to view that particular point. Right now we're looking at one of the highest peaks in British Columbia, about 13,000 feet. And if I was flying in that area, I could preview this by just taking a look at this high fidelity visuals of this particular mountain. Oh, let's go back there. And as I also mentioned, there's a 3D approach preview. The 3D approach preview was the most recent addition to this whole 3D option. And what this does is if we have a route planned and an approach loaded in, we can tap directly on that approach in the edit route bar. You'll see that there is a 3D procedure preview option right at the bottom. And what this allows me to do is preview that approach as if I was flying through it in a 3D view format. It'll also display your mandatory altitudes and speeds according to the Jepson data. And you can fly the approach before ever flying the approach. iPhone parity to iPad. So for years, the iPhone app was slightly different to the iPad ForeFlight app. And that was strictly due to limitations in screen size and processing power and other little things. However, recently, the iPhones have been getting bigger and more powerful, and now compare very much so to iPads. So what you see on your iPad is what you see on your iPhone. The team worked really hard on this, making sure that there's a seamless transition between devices. So if you ever plan a flight on your iPhone, you can just hop in your airplane and it'll be synced to your iPad. You bring it up and you're ready to go. With the newest editions of iOS, multitasking is available and it is supported by ForeFlight. What this essentially does is it allows ForeFlight to be used in a full split screen format with other apps at the same time. To open ForeFlight in a split screen with another app, you open ForeFlight, swipe up slowly from the bottom to show the iOS dock, bring up a second app to the side of the screen like that, and now we have a split screen with two apps. You can then drag the separator in the middle to change the relative sizes of those apps. And you can also dismiss one app by just dragging the separator off the side of the screen. Which is a really neat feature. If you want to look up, be looking at some aviation website and also be looking at ForeFlight at the same time to gather all your information, that's a really neat way to do that. In this case, we have Safari opened up with ForeFlight. Passenger. Passenger is ForeFlight's free companion app to ForeFlight Mobile. That helps your passenger answer, or helps you answer your passenger's age-old question, hey, are we there yet? The Passenger app is actually downloaded separately from the Apple App Store. And it's a very slimmed-down version of what you see on ForeFlight, but it gives your passenger what the information they need to know. Now, Your device does not need to be connected to the same Wi-Fi network as your passenger device. The link between ForeFlight and to passenger will work even if you're not on a Wi-Fi network. The only requirement is that Wi-Fi is on both devices, and it will link your devices, and it gives you a nice high-performance global map, the same thing you see in ForeFlight, your destination weather, automatic route updates. If you make an update on ForeFlight and like a routing change, it will show up on the passenger app. So it's a nice little complement, and especially if you fly with passengers very often. ForeFlight Web is a fantastic tool. It brings ForeFlight's powerful flight planning capabilities right to your web browser. You can plan, file, brief, and then transition right to your mobile device without skipping a beat, heading out to your airplane. And your planning activities automatically syncs across all your devices. So if you're in the office and you're planning a flight or a trip, you can do that all on your web browser, and then hop in your airplane or pick up your iPad, hop in your airplane, and be ready to go. The web feature, the planning on the web, is available to all ForeFlight customers, and it's a really, really great addition to your flight planning suite. It can be accessed by ForeFlight.com, and you go in the top right-hand corner and logging in, and you'll be all set to go. You'll see a very familiar screens on ForeFlight Web, with your main menu being on your left-hand side there. You can get all your maps, your overlays, your imagery, logbook information. Here's where you can manage your account as well. Almost finishing up here. For those of you who are wondering about ForeFlight subscription levels, you can always visit foreflight.com/pricing for the most up-to-date information. But right now, as a Canadian pilot, you're looking at Basic Plus, Pro Plus, and Performance Plus subscriptions, 3 tiers, starting at $139.99, working your way up to Performance Plus of $419.99. Now, it all depends what type of flying you do, right? If you're a VFR-only pilot, you may not need all the Performance Plus features. But if you are a VFR pilot in British Columbia, flying in the mountains all the time, then maybe some of those Performance Plus features are for you. So I really encourage you to explore this page and see what features may be applicable to your flying. Regardless of what plan you choose, you can be rest assured that you'll have all the filing and data that you need, filing capabilities and data that you need to fly safely with ForeFlight as an integral flight application. You can always add custom features with ForeFlight, custom add-ons with ForeFlight. In this case, if you're looking for optional JEP IFR charts to add, or you can add on regions, for example, the USA, if you're a frequent flyer to the US, or a European subscription as well. We have charts and data for pretty much everywhere around the world as far as JEPs and IFR charts go. And then specifically in Europe, depending on where you're going. If you ever have any doubts on which subscription or add-ons to choose, please give us a shout and we'll be happy to guide you through. Which leads me to, how can we help? We are always ready to help 7 days a week. A team at ForeFlight.com. If you shoot us an email, there will be a real pilot answering that email and helping you out. Some useful resources for yourself. I circle back to that pilot's guide. It is online. It is in the application under Documents and Catalog, ForeFlight. It is your and myself's single point of comprehensive information on every feature in the application. ForeFlight.com/videos, a lot of helpful videos, hopefully including this one, on how some features work and describing every new release. We usually tend to come out with a description of a new feature. The latest info, blog.foreflight.com. We update that with a lot of great information. And again, that team at foreflight.com email is your go-to. And on behalf of ForeFlight and myself, I'd like to thank you very much for joining us today. I hope I was able to provide some insight into ForeFlight's capabilities for Canadian pilots. And now we'll be taking some questions.
All right. Thanks everyone for submitting all the questions. That was quite a lot of questions we were responding to, but I think we were able to handle most of them. So now we'll go ahead and just pick a few of the good ones to answer out loud here. So we have Dominik on the line, as well as Adrian Tegler, and he is another one of our Canadian Pilot Support Team members. So he's on the line as well to help answer some of these questions. So first off, Dominik, if you're there, here's the first question. I've had a lot of people in my community ask what other countries are supported. So maybe can you address that?
Yeah, absolutely, Sam. So ForeFlight currently offers specific subscriptions for the Canadian region, the United States, and Europe. That being said, Jeppesen charts may be purchased for other regions around the world. And if you're a European pilot specifically, depending on the country you're flying in, you can purchase VFR and IFR charts specific to that country.
Yeah, good point, especially that ForeFlight will, I mean, as long as you have a GPS receiver, ForeFlight will work anywhere in the world technically, and there are a lot of features that are global, but especially if you're really looking for the kind of full featured support you would get in the US or Canada or Europe, those are the only places you can get that level of support at this time. So we got a lot of questions related to filing flight plans. This is obviously, it's a little bit more complicated than it is in the US, and so we know that it's a pretty active topic for at least the Canadian pilots who are participating in this call. So here's a question relating to that. Filing VFR flight plans in Canada works fine, but cross-border flight plans sometimes don't get passed to ATC when activated. This seems to be a US issue. So can one or both of you address that particular issue in terms of filing cross-border VFR flight plans?
Yeah, sure. So the Canadian flight plans, Canadian VFR flight plans in this case, that are filed in Canada, they are sent to the U.S. side, and but plans are actually routed to the U.S. FSS, the appropriate FSS there. ATC does not get a copy of this, and ATC will have to pull up your flight plan once you contact them crossing the border.
So the answer, I guess, is that if you're filing from Canada to the US, you do still need to call and cancel by phone, right? So just canceling within ForeFlight and then doing nothing else. The ATC on the US side is going to think that your flight plan is still open. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. So if you were to file this flight plan, for example, in the United States, you would have to contact them, close your flight plan with them, with the local FSS.
Got it.
And that could be done by 1-800-WX brief or through the tower itself.
All right, next up here. Sometimes the top of the Vancouver terminal chart appears and blocks out details of the moving map. How do I get rid of it? And we had a very similar question to this, which was, how do I disable changing to the VTA when zooming in? I want to stay on the VNC. Adrian, do you have the answer to this one?
Yeah, Sam, I can jump in on that one. So the way that the VNC and VTA charts are built into ForeFlight is almost on a type of a tile system. And you can change the settings on the maps page in ForeFlight using the gear button. And then at the bottom of that, you'll see an option for map touch action. And under map touch action, you can select no action or bring charts forward or bring charts forward with the legends. So there's a few different options, especially in an area where you have multiple VNC charts overlapping. These options give you the ability to bring a chart forward and see every single chart that is in that area. So even if there's overlap, you can tap on the chart, bring it forward, see, tap again, and the next chart will come forward. So it's something that you have to play around with a little bit and see how that works kind of firsthand. And then to add to that, if you have bring charts forward with legends, you're actually going to see the full chart with the legends as well. So sometimes there's VFR checkpoints that are on the collar on the legend of the chart. You might want to bring it forward and see that, or see something on the legend. So that's a good reason to do that. And the second part of the question, in terms of zooming in on a VNC chart and having the VTA pop up forward and maybe not wanting that functionality, if you have bring charts forward, then if you zoom in, the VTA shouldn't automatically pop up. And if it does, a single tap on the map should bring that VNC back forward again for you.
Yeah, good answer. That bring chart to front is one of those features that seems like sometimes people will find the setting and switch it, and then they forgot that they switched it, and then they wonder why is this chart legend covering up this part of the map. So anytime you're having any kind of problem with the charts that you're seeing, or it seems like you're seeing a legend where you don't want the legend, or you're having that issue with the VNC, definitely check out that map touch action. All right, let's try. We got a lot of questions related to ForeFlight Logbook, and it seems like everyone is aware that there are some missing pieces from the ForeFlight Logbook at the moment related to Canadian pilots. So this question in particular, I use ForeFlight exclusively for my flight logging. I love the currency summary feature, but unfortunately it only shows FAA currencies. Is there a way to show Transport Canada summaries? And can one of you address just some of the deficiencies at the moment, and potential ways around them?
Yeah, I can jump
so,
in.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Adrian.
Yeah, I could start, and then Dominic, you can add some additional things. So as a Canadian pilot, I use ForeFlight Logbook, and it's a great way to log my flights. And as Dom had mentioned, it's nice to have a digital logbook that's built right into the app that I use for flying anyway. But there are some things right now, as we got a lot of questions about, that aren't available in Canada. So we don't currently have the Canadian currency summaries built in. So that's something that we definitely hear the feature request for, and that's we do appreciate that. So logbook summaries are not available for Canada, as well as so that's a currency summary and currencies. So Dom, I don't know if you wanted to add anything else in terms of some of the reports that aren't available. You can jump in.
Yeah, so I was going to mention the reports as well. If you go into Logbook and under the reports, you see that a lot of the private pilot, commercial pilot reports are based on the federal aviation regulations. And those are obviously not applicable to Canadian pilots, but we are working on getting Canadian pilot reports and progress reports in there. So if you are working on your private pilot's license, or if you're working on your commercial pilot's license, we hope to get those in there so that you can see what your progress is towards your CPR PPL flight test, as well as your instrument ride as well. Things are a bit different, as you are aware, and between the two countries as far as what their currencies are and reports, but we are working on updating that in Logbook.
And just to add something that I found useful as a Canadian pilot is you can add your own custom fields in ForeFlight Logbook. So that's great if you want to track something that is not currently available as a field. So if it's, say, night cross-country time, and you have a specific field, you can add that as a custom field in ForeFlight Logbook, and you'll see that the summary in ForeFlight on the web, when you look at your main summary page there, will show those custom currency, or those not currencies, but those custom fields that you've created. So that's a great way to track anything that's outside kind of the what's already there. And I've used that for a whole bunch of different fields in my flight training and my flying.
Yeah, I was actually going to mention those custom fields, and especially the fact that when you export your logbook data from ForeFlight, which is something you can do on the web, and that's different from the logbook reports. You can actually just export all of your logbook data, and that export does include all of those custom fields. So of course, if you want to, you can use ForeFlight to do the logging and then export that data if you wanted to do some additional processing somewhere else. Next question here, do I still need to buy the CFS charts when I have a ForeFlight subscription? So even though ForeFlight does supply the CFS digitally, this person is asking, legally, do I still need to buy a hard copy?
Yeah, I can jump on that one, Sam. So again, from my knowledge and from everything that I've heard, there's no requirement to have that hard paper copy in Canada. The key is having the information that's relative to your flight available to you. So if you're asked by some type of an examiner or something like that, or by Transport Canada themselves, the CARs state that you need to have the relevant information for the flight for you. So that would be the CFS and the charts and everything that's relative to your flight. They do not specify that that has to be a paper copy of that flight anywhere. And throughout the years that I've been flying, and as electronic flight bags and ForeFlight have become more and more popular for Canadian pilots, I've continued to hear that using electronic flight bag to access all of the information and the charts that you need for the flight is sufficient, and it meets the requirements here in Canada.
All right, next question. I can't find a way to get to the VFR terminal procedure chart from the airports tab. Is it only possible via the documents tab, or is there a faster workaround?
Yep, so there is actually a faster workaround. I did brush over it in the presentation, but just briefly. So if you do go to your airports tab and you type in an airport that you know has VFR terminal procedures, we can take London or St. Catharines, for example. They're located as a quick kind of option under procedure and other. And under other, you'll see that there's London VFR procedure charts available in ForeFlight there. So that's where you can quickly access them. If there's more detail than on that just one page, that's when you have to go back into the CFS, the full CFS in the Documents tab, and read more pages if you'd like.
All right, next up, there were a couple questions related to SiriusXM weather and Garmin's GDL 51 and 52 devices pertaining to the extent of that weather coverage. And this person was asking specifically, how far north does that coverage extend? Does it go as far as Fort McMurray, or where can someone learn about what that coverage is?
Yeah, so I was looking at that question, and I was looking at a map that I was provided, which is actually part of our knowledge base article on our website. I just have to get the exact name of it, but it stretches pretty far north in British Columbia, Alberta, and Saskatchewan, but not all the way north. So I believe this question was referring to Fort McMurray, and I think the XM radar coverage is just short of that airport. So in that case, I doubt that the layer would be available there, or XM weather would be available there. But in the extremes of British Columbia, and actually all provinces, Quebec and Ontario, that's where the coverage kind of starts to die off.
Yeah, so if you just go to ForeFlight.com and you bring down the support dropdown and you go to the support center, you can also get there just at ForeFlight.com/support. If you just search for Sirius XM coverage, the first, let's see, not the very first one. There are a couple. Here we go. The second result, which the title of this article is, "What is the extent of satellite coverage with the SXAR1?" The SXAR1 is a discontinued product, by the way, but the coverage would be the same with the GDL series. And so that includes some helpful graphics showing what the actual extent of the coverage is. So we're going to go ahead and wrap it up here. The last question I want to address was, will this presentation be viewable later? And the answer is yes. We're recording this presentation as well as all of this whole question and answer session, and it will be available at foreflight.com/on-frequency with a dash between those, so on-frequency. You can go there starting either later today or probably tomorrow, and we will have embedded this video there, as well as on YouTube. You can just go to our YouTube channel and find all of our webinars that we've done in this series. But thank you everyone for attending. Thank you so much, Dominik, for putting on this presentation. Thank you, Adrian, for helping out with the questions. This has been a really great time, and I hope that everyone who attended learned something new and helpful. So thanks again, everyone, and we'll see you on the next webinar.